Well, thank you all. Again, welcome. I thanked Brent Ridge when he finished this morning because he told a tale that for our family was pretty personal. He talked about the utility crisis last winter in Texas. Now, if you ask our son and daughter-in-law, they do not live in Texas, they live in Austin. They went 6 days with no water and no heat. So our son, armed with a doctorate and a bucket, scooped water first from snowbanks and then from swimming pools for all those days so they could put it into the bathtub so they could have water to flush with. But there is a golden lining, a business success story out of all this. One of the places giving out bulk water during this crisis was a local business. And our son got water and wanted to support that business. He continues to do so this day. It was a brewery that now brews his favorite IPA. So there's a golden lining for you. When I was an editor in Iowa some years ago, Terry Branstad, during his first go around as governor, he knew his audience pretty well. He would come visit our editorial board and say, there are two important things that I can always gauge whether a community is going to be healthy. And that is a newspaper with a local voice and a bank with a local voice. Now, clearly, we've seen changes and challenges, although I would argue both of those still continue to be very true factors when it comes to success. But today we're going to introduce three other pillars: broadband, education, and healthcare. And we are blessed today with four dynamic representatives of those industries, and it's my honor now to introduce them. Angie Dickerson is Executive Director of the Minnesota Office of Broadband Development. Angie oversees a portfolio of $126 million in broadband infrastructure investments across the state, certifies telecommuter-friendly communities, and engages partners in a multi-stakeholder approach to promoting digital equity and economic vitality. Before taking a role 2.5 years ago, Angie served as director of the Wisconsin State Broadband Office. She has served on a variety of boards and advisory committees, including with the Federal Communications Commission, providing advocacy and expertise on all things broadband. Angie, thanks for joining us. Brian Krambeer serves as president and CEO of MiEnergy Cooperative, the rural electric cooperative with nearly 23,000 services in southeastern Minnesota and northern Iowa, along with service to 10 municipalities that distribute energy to their residents. MiEnergy joined with Mabel Cooperative Telephone and Spring Grove Communications to create MiBroadband in the summer of 2018. MiBroadband serves fixed wireless broadband areas of southeastern Minnesota and northeastern Iowa. In 2021, Brian and MiEnergy received the Electric Cooperative Purpose Award from the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association for their work in bringing high-speed internet to their communities. Mary Freiberg has served as Executive Director and CEO of Scenic Bluffs Community Health Center since 2003. During Mary's tenure, the Cashton-based Community Health Center has grown to include more than 14,000 square feet with medical, chiropractic, behavioral health, dental, and pharmacy services. Scenic Bluffs also operates a health center in Norwalk and has formed strategic partnerships with Vernon Memorial Healthcare and Gunderson Health System to deliver dental services in Viroqua and La Crosse, respectively, along with behavioral health services in partnership with St. Clair Health Mission in La Crosse. Mike Bigley has served as superintendent of the Whitehall School District since 2003. Mike, along with his colleagues at Arcadia, Blair Taylor, and Independence, lead the Trempealeau Valley Cooperative, an educational co-op bringing area schools together to provide more opportunities for students. The co-op's vision to develop career-ready and college-ready students by providing high-caliber learning experiences, preparation, and pathways has led to the development of innovative career and technical education strategies in partnership with local business and industry. What a great panel. Let's welcome them, please. Angie, I'm incredibly impressed with your portfolio of broadband investments. Could you please provide examples of those investments?
Well, I'd be happy to. And first, I have to thank Jenny for the invitation to be here today. Wonderful to see a former Senator Schilling here as well. When I worked for the state of Wisconsin, I used to tell folks, thank you for getting me out of Madison. And so today I'm saying thank you for getting me out of St. Paul. So, you know, the state of Minnesota has had a broadband infrastructure grant program since 2014. You know, folks there recognized early on the important role that broadband access was going to play in the vitality of our rural communities. And the same holds true for the state of Wisconsin. Folks here have been working diligently for years to get this infrastructure deployed. In Minnesota, you know, we have, I'm sitting next to one of our grant recipients here, so I imagine you'll hear more about their project. But we, like you had mentioned, we've invested $126 million to date through our border-to-border infrastructure grant program. That's been an annual competitive grant process. And that funding has provided the monies needed to build out 179 projects across the state. Our program is a matching grant. So that program also spurred an additional $180 million of private and local investment on top of that state investment. And recently, with CARES funding through a different program within this agency that I work in, the state also awarded, what was it, $32 million in grants to 11 communities across the state of Minnesota. And that program allowed the state to fund up to 100% of those projects. One of the recent projects that we funded, just as by way of an example, was in the last grant round. It was a $1.5 million grant to a company called Scenic. They built out a gigabit network in areas of Fillmore and Winona counties in Minnesota that served 374 locations, including 88 farms. And the keys with the projects in Minnesota and in Wisconsin, I heard a lot of discussion from the former panel or the prior panel here was around partnerships. And in the case of this project that I mentioned, this was a partnership with the Fillmore County EDA. And I see there are economic development folks in the room, such key partners in deploying broadband, working with your electric co-ops. Again, another wonderful opportunity to get these projects deployed, but I'll leave it there.
Terrific. Brian, I'm really impressed with the recognition that you and your company received for bringing high-speed internet to southeastern Minnesota and northeastern Iowa. Could you please share some of the strategies for getting rural areas wired?
Yeah, and I would also like to echo kind of the introduction to partnerships. We're a big fan of partnerships and a lot of things that we do. We work with Dairyland Power and our partnerships for our power supply, and we looked at our 2 local telephone cooperatives for our partnership to build out broadband. We live in a beautiful part of the state, northeast Iowa, southeastern Minnesota, much like here in La Crosse. Beautiful hills and valleys and a lot of trees. I can tell you that it's a beautiful area, but it's really difficult to put infrastructure in. Add to that the density. MiEnergy Electric Co-op, we have about 5,500 miles of electric distribution line. We have a density of 4 members per mile of line. So you add that into the tough terrain, the challenges of putting in that infrastructure, and then you add in there the low density. I think there's probably a reason why broadband hasn't been built out in a lot of the rural areas. And that's why it's so important to have the federal funds available and to have the state resources and the great work that Angie does to provide those programs, because it truly is critical infrastructure to be built out. MiEnergy Electric Co-op has 43 electric distribution substations. We needed broadband just to operate our electric system, all the data that comes back. So that's what started us to start looking at reaching out to our broadband partners to get broadband to meet our needs. And then also for a dual purpose to say, hey, our members need broadband just as bad as we do at our electric co-op. So that's why it's a primary focus for us to build out broadband, not only for us, but for our members. So they can do the things that everybody else is able to do, telework, distance learning. I think COVID has brought it to the next level on just how important that infrastructure is. And I'm really proud of what we're doing and really excited. And again, hopefully the programs can continue and we can take advantage of those resources. So thank you.
Terrific. Mary, rural healthcare faces all sorts of challenges, but your organization seems to be a shining star in our region. How have you built such a strong network of care, and how have you built so many impressive partnerships?
I think that the main thing is we're all in this together. You live in a small community and you realize you are intricately linked with everybody else who's in that small community. And so what we did early on is connected with area school districts, with the local bank, with area healthcare organizations, with our state and federal funding organizations. And what we want to do is just make sure that we stay strongly connected. We belong to 50 different local coalitions, boards, and groups on a state and local basis. So when someone is meeting on a health or human service issue that impacts health, we're there. We host domestic abuse services at the health center. We host legal services at the health center. We make sure that things that keep people healthy that may not be direct clinical services, that those have a home in the organization. On occasion, we sponsor English language classes at the health center. Cashton is home to a large number of dairy farm workers, and many of whom don't necessarily speak English very fluently. And so what we do is offer English language opportunities to learn to practice. So we do that. When there was flooding in the region about midnight, this was in 2018, about midnight, I got a phone call from our local first responder who said, will you open up a shelter? And I said, and so if you've ever been to Cashton, we're on top of a hill. And if Cashton floods, build the ark, because it's just not going to flood. And so I said, sure, but why? And he said, we're evacuating the valleys around the community, and we need to make sure that there's a place for those to go. So we had access to cots because of emergency preparedness things. And so we opened up a shelter in the health center one night. And so it's knowing people, it's staying connected, because the health of the community is as important to us as the health of people walking through the doors of the clinic for clinical services. So partnerships are it. That's what it's all about.
Terrific. Mike, I'm curious, how are you able to pull together 4 school districts to form the Trempealeau Valley Cooperative?
Well, I think to start with, I'm going to steal Nathan's phrase from the last panel, which is we just did it. We didn't really ask permission, and we didn't apologize for doing the things that we needed to do. We have, if you're familiar with our area, primarily in Trempealeau County, central Trempealeau County, we have some tremendous employers. We have Ashley Furniture in the area, Pilgrim's Pride, Whitehall Specialties, Nelson Global Finishing Solutions, and many others. And it became pretty clear that we weren't able to meet the needs of our employers. And I don't need to tell this room the economics of that scenario. If employers can't get employees and can't do their things, they can't stay. And this is my 25th year as a school superintendent, all in rural Wisconsin. And I've seen the death spiral over and over again. I grew up in a small town about an hour north of Eau Claire, and watched that area die because the industry left. It was a paper mill town. And I think we had that same feel, and at the same time, kind of a conglomeration of things took place is we got engaged with the Waniks from Ashley Furniture. And they opened their minds, they opened their hearts to us and started sharing some things with us, some perspectives and what the world was going to look like. And that hit at the same time we figured out as schools that we couldn't continue to compete. Our system in Wisconsin right now requires us to compete for kids. That's how we get funded. So what that means is we duplicate everything, literally in rural America, every 8 miles. We duplicate things over and over again because we can't afford to not do them. We lose kids. So what we did is kind of flew in the face of that and said, let's work together and do more for our kids and truly make them globally competitive, or give them the opportunity to be globally competitive. So the short answer is unapologetically, we just did it. And second of all, we built some partnerships along the way and learned a great deal and have made some mistakes, but we didn't spend years and years and years planning. We jumped in and were willing to make the mistakes.
I'm curious, did you have any pushback from local businesses? Did any of them put up a wall or say, I'm not interested, or were you able to convince them?
No one has thrown their hands up and said, we're not interested. I think we've seen differences in what that interpretation is. And along the line, I think when you talk partnerships, especially in the K-12 world, often that becomes a funding request. And that's not what we did. We really went at this to change the world for our kids. One of our key elements of our co-op is our job is to provide kids the opportunities to go anywhere in the world, and then work with our local region, our areas, our businesses to keep the kids there. That's kind of the challenge. But no, we've been welcomed everywhere we've talked. We've done many of these between the 4 of us as superintendents, talked to an awful lot of folks, but their arms have always been open. Our primary relationship right now has been with the Waniks and the folks at Ashley Furniture, just because they're a huge, globally competitive, very successful business, and to their credit, they opened up and said, "Come on, and we'll teach you along with us."
Pretty good place to start. Angie, part of what your role is certifying a telecommuter friendly community. Could you please let us know what that means?
Happy to. And it all started here in Wisconsin. While I was working here, folks from the Wisconsin State Telecommunications Association and folks up in Bayfield County Economic Development and the broadband provider there in Novato, the folks up in Bayfield County said, look, we've got a lot of really good broadband infrastructure up here. Yes, we have areas of our county that are in desperate need of better broadband, but we have a lot of people who come here for vacation and have second homes here. And what if we started promoting our county as a place that was a good place to not only live and play, but you could work from here too, because we've got the infrastructure to do that. And out of those conversations came this idea around certifying communities as being telecommuter forward. And we launched that program here, I want to say in 2018 or 2019. I should have put that in my notes. Since then, a similar program was launched in Minnesota as well. We launched it there last year. Sadly, the pandemic made that all even more necessary than anyone ever would have even imagined that it would have been. But listening to the conversations in this room today, what I'm hearing is, we want people to come back to our rural communities. We want to keep people in our rural communities. And what I've heard over the last year and a half from folks who could, if they could move to a rural area and have the broadband access that they needed to do their jobs, if they could be telecommuters, a lot of them did that. And particularly, just anecdotally, knowing folks who have second homes or vacation type properties, when they were forced to work from home, they worked from some other place outside of the city if they could. And like I said, a lot of folks did that. So the notion around the telecommuter forward certification, again, was to recognize communities where they had the broadband infrastructure in place. There were partnerships between the local unit of government, the broadband provider, employers, realtors, to make to make that community a place that was welcoming to telecommuters, along with promoting another way to promote the area as a place to live, work, and play. And I got to say, this was something that before I came to work for the state of Wisconsin, I lived in northern Minnesota most of my adult life. And I can remember living outside of the Duluth area for years. And I was an IT person at the time, looking at jobs in the metro area and definitely not wanting to move to the Twin Cities area to have those jobs. And I just thought, well, if I could do that remotely, wouldn't that be great? And now, sadly, because of the pandemic, I never wanted a pandemic to make this happen, but this is an opportunity for our rural communities. And I look at my own office now at the state of Minnesota. My team is staying in telework status, even as the pandemic is hopefully leaving us. My team is going to stay in telework status, and they're scattered around the state, which is where they should be, because we work with primarily rural communities. And the opportunity that I see there is for Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa. Think of your state government. Think of your local units of government. Those folks all got sent home to do their jobs. And to the extent that they could keep doing those jobs remotely, part of my team is taking their St. Paul wages and keeping those wages in their local rural communities. I think it's fantastic.
So some solutions come out of a crisis, which often happens. Brian, what are the biggest stumbling blocks you face in serving your customers with high-speed broadband, and how much of your region lacks high-speed broadband?
Again, I alluded to the tough terrain. What I didn't mention was just the cost. We're averaging about $18,000 a mile per customer install. That's why it's so important to have the programs that Angie's referring to in the federal and state dollars. The other thing that we're having a challenge right now is getting infrastructure. 18 months to get fiber optic cable to even put in the ground. Those are some of the challenges that we're seeing right now. Workforce that was alluded to on the panel this morning. All of the above. And the interesting thing is, this is a crucial opportunity for us in the greater America, is that I think there are people that are looking at leaving the cities and they want to find an area in a small community that has a good school and has a hospital and can support the local infrastructure. So it's really critical that we do this in a very timely manner. But again, the challenges seem to be pretty daunting at times, but again, that's what co-ops are all about. We're in it for the long term, making long-term 30-year investments to help sustain our communities.
Terrific. Speaking of challenges, Mary, I know that you have challenges that you face serving a rural population with quality healthcare. So what kind of challenges and how do you overcome them?
Sure. The pandemic clearly showed a lot of challenges that we need to address. And so generally workforce for us is the biggest ongoing constant issue that you have. It's difficult to recruit to rural communities. Cashton's a town of about 1,100 people. We're only 25 miles from La Crosse. But for people who live in La Crosse, sometimes that feels like a really long distance. For those of us who live in Cashton, it doesn't feel so long at all. But so I think workforce is the biggest ongoing challenge. I think the pandemic called out a lot of the inequities in the healthcare system, and so people's ability to afford services is certainly there. We're a special kind of clinic called a federally qualified health center, so we're a community health center. We have a sliding fee scale, and so that is available for people who are lower income, and so that makes it nice. I think the challenges that we face are there certainly, but I go back to the previous question of the partnerships that we have, and so we have very strong partners in Gunderson Health Systems and Mayo Clinic and Vernon Memorial Healthcare. And so we are able to work to support patients because of the partnerships that exist with other healthcare providers. I think that in rural communities too, especially rural Wisconsin, there's a number of people who are low income, and making sure that you're able to offer services to people who are the workers, people who are doing the work on the dairy farms, or people who are in the schools. Those are important challenges. We also support our school districts. Right now, we employ the school nurses in 2 area schools, and last year was an intense year for anybody who worked in a public school system. And this year, I don't know, is any better. And I've seen some of those school board meetings, and there's such a polarization of basic public health messages and things that are important. And I think making sure that we're all supporting one another as we deal with all of the ugliness that exists right now around a public health approach to trying to stop this pandemic. We've also got vaccine mandates, and those get very difficult on occasion for people to handle. And so this is an intense year. But as everybody up here said, look, we're in it for the long haul. We've been around for 27 years. We'll be around after that. And so what we all have to do is to figure out how to weather this bump that we're in together. Because I do see workforce challenges getting worse before they get better for the healthcare system. I imagine too for the educational system. This is not going to be an easy couple of years for us.
Indeed. Mike, I'm not surprised at your one-word answer of worse, and I'm terribly sorry for that challenge, but I know you're up to it. Can you give us an idea of ways that your cooperative has worked with businesses to develop curriculum?
Again, it came up in the prior panel too, the systematic change, and I want to go back to that because I think what we're looking at doing is creating true systematic change for education. For forever, most of you were educated in the same capacity, right? How long we sat in a class determined how many credits we got, how many credits it took to graduate, you were done. We're trying to shift into a competency-based model, which lets kids go as fast and as far as they can. We're challenging kids. We're not, with our partnership with Ashley, I had the ability to travel all over the country. We spent 11 days in Germany looking at educational systems, K-12s, technical colleges, universities, literally all over the world. And what we saw, maybe the most important takeaway for me is in our country, we continue to tell our kids what they can't do. Other parts of the world right now that are highly competitive with us tell them what they can, or don't tell them anything. They just let them go. So I think we're trying to create that systematic change. So we need industry partners because we don't know. One of the things that precipitated I think the real and meaningful conversation with the folks at Ashley was we simply said, we don't know what we don't know. And quite frankly, nor do you, because we have this constant battle of education doesn't provide this, but there's no support for education, yada, yada, yada. So at some point we have to have the real conversations and say, okay, what is the reality? What are we doing? What are we trying to do? What do we need to do? So we've been able to get access to what future workforces need to look like, what workforces in other parts of the world look like. So we've tried to create those competency-based, a little bit more of a standardized approach to curriculum. Right now, a lot of curriculum is controlled by the instructor, right? That's what we see. And with the instructor then goes the program. So if you lose an instructor, you lose all kinds of momentum with your programs. So our most high profile project to date is our mobile skills lab. And that is a state-of-the-art, one of a kind in the country mobile lab. It's about 900 square feet inside. It's a true classroom, all built around smart automation, robotics, computer modeling. So SolidWorks is all part of that piece. And we put kids in there earning dual credit, earning high school credit, earning industry certifications. SACA is our most important or most prolific one right now, the Smart Automation Certification Association. with that mobile lab, we started the first year in how things changed. So this is year 4 of that. First year, we had 12 kids take classes. Last year, we had 254 kids take classes. So we're changing their outlook and what they're able to access and what they're being suggested, quite frankly. If we show them what's out there, it's a whole lot easier for kids to make good decisions. So all of that has come from those partnerships. And literally, I could talk the full 90 minutes on this stuff. So I'll just stop and go back to the next one, okay?
That's really impressive, I have to tell you. Angie, could you provide us an example of a multi-stakeholder approach to promoting digital equity and economic vitality?
I can, but I'm going to give you a different one that I thought I was going to give. Seeing a former senator here today, because I'm seeing you. I'm remembering. I think maybe the first time we met was in the living room of in rural Crawford County, where a group of neighbors got together and said, we have terrible internet. We don't have internet service here. It's terrible. What can we do? And they set about bringing a group of people together who might be able to help them. And when I talk about working with a diverse group of stakeholder or a multi-stakeholder approach, it reminds me of sitting in the living room that day, because they not only had the neighbors there, they brought in folks from the state like me, they brought in legislators, they brought in a gentleman from the local newspaper, and other interested folks from the community. And they kept working together, gathering information, sharing information with one another. And it takes that diverse group of voices at the table, even right from the very beginning. Like I said, this was in someone's living room on I think it was. Yes, thank you. Thank you. And for us at the state level, how we look at that approach. So Brian actually serves on our governor's state broadband task force, which is something that was started in Minnesota, I think in 2008. So it's gone through a number of different governors within the state, but that group is comprised of broadband providers, representatives from healthcare, education, private sector, and these folks work together to create a report that's full of recommendations for the governor and the legislature to guide broadband policy across the state. It's a heavy lift, but it's because of the work of these prior task forces that Minnesota has a state broadband office, has a broadband infrastructure grant program, has goals in statute related to getting the entire state connected. So that's one important piece of it. Some of the other things that we're doing in Minnesota too is we recently started a interagency digital equity working group. What we saw out of the pandemic, I think it's fair to say that in Minnesota, prior to the pandemic, we were definitely focused our investments on the infrastructure piece. But as the pandemic showed us, there are a number of folks who live in areas where they have fantastic broadband access, but they either can't afford it or they don't have the skills or devices to use it. And so that's where our interagency group is looking at how we can better share information among state agencies and with our external stakeholders. And it was during the pandemic too that Minnesota governor worked with philanthropy and private businesses to start the Partnership for Connected Minnesota. And it was that group of folks who did fundraising to get monies to help school districts get students connected at home when everyone was sent home. So I think it's a common theme. It's a common theme. Some of these problems are so big, it's not one perspective that can bring the solution to the table, and it takes a diverse group of folks to take a look at it.
So there is such a thing as operator error? Is that what you're telling us? When our son and daughter-in-law come home, we don't refer to it as a holiday. We talk about a visit from tech support, just so you know. Brian, you mentioned a statistic that is really staggering, $18,000 a mile to stretch broadband. That's a lot of money. So certainly you have lots of success stories. Give us an example of some of the success that you've had in stretching and making your region more wired.
Yeah, and just to add to that, that's kind of an average cost on the projects that we're doing. Again, it's the hills, it's the rock, it's the trees, the low density. But broadband is a competitive industry, unlike our electric utility. So we may put fiber across somebody's driveway, but they don't necessarily subscribe and take our service. So that density becomes even less. So that's why it's really important that that we offer the quality service. We also make sure that it's affordable. That's why the grants to help us reduce that cost are so very important. The other thing that is so important is getting creative. One of the things that I've learned from serving on the task force is all the different technologies. Right now, everybody wants to talk about fiber. You know, that is the best thing. It's the most sure thing. But there are other technologies. We also offer a fixed wireless business. And that is a way for us to be able to build fiber to an area, put it on a tower. Maybe it's a farmer's grain leg. We can cover an area of maybe 10 miles. It's line of sight, so it has limitations, but we can get some really good speeds and get that service out there faster rather than having to wait to plow fiber in. The other thing in this part of the country, we only get so many months during the summer to plow fiber. You know, it's kind of like a couple months of summer, and then you get bad sledding for the other weather. So you're pretty limited just from a construction season. But probably the one that's energized me the most is that we get a lot of calls, and I have to say the only complaint that I've got for us venturing into our broadband business with our partners is how soon can you get it to me? That is the number one issue. And I had a member call and just said, is there any way you can get to us? If you any way, and we use the fixed wireless technology to get to a barn, and then they used a relay to get to the house. And she called me after it was in and just said, this changed our life. We don't have to sell our house and move to Rochester because they're both telecommuting. Our kids can do distance learning. So we don't have to get down to the 4-H ground where we put a hotspot so people could drive in and get there, do their homework that way. So she said, broadband totally changed our lives, and just wanted to say thank you. And that was energizing to me, and it kind of made me feel like, wow, this is what the electric co-op directors and leaders felt in the 1930s when they were delivering electricity. It's the same type of thing. Broadband is the new electricity, and that's why it's so important and pretty fulfilling.
Absolutely. It's crucial, especially post-COVID. Mary, as I was going down the list of all your impressive services and partnerships from Scenic Bluffs Community Health, I stopped at one, and that's behavioral health. And that is a big problem in big communities, and it certainly must be in rural communities. So how do you provide quality behavioral health to a rural region?
I'll just build off of what Brian said. It's because of broadband. That is a big part of that is because of broadband. Prior to the pandemic, we had behavioral health services. We delivered those in-house. We had people come to us for appointments. We were in several area school districts where we would send clinicians into the school districts to do behavioral health services in the schools. When the pandemic hit, we had thought about telehealth services, but we'd never done those. But we were fortunate to live in a community that had already been wired. We have a great telecommunications company, Vernatel, that had been very receptive and responsive. to the needs of our community and had wired the community already. And so we were able very quickly within 4 weeks to stand up telehealth services. On the behavioral health side, we went from 0 telehealth services for behavioral health to 4 weeks into the pandemic, 25% of all of our services at the health center were telehealth services. So hugely important. We also saw the strong need for more broadband in communities because you had people who were able, because of where they lived, to access that, and they could utilize services through their phones or through their computers. And so that was useful, but you also saw people who were not able to do that. I loved when you had talked about the digital equity work group, because that is totally where we need to have a focus at this point. I think making sure that there are people who both have access to broadband, but then know how to use it, and supports for that sort of service. We have someone on staff shortly that we will employ just to do that kind of work, to support individuals in being able to access the services that are there. I think on the other issues that isn't telehealth related, licensure of clinicians, Wisconsin has this wildly confusing, to me anyway, a licensure of behavioral health clinicians. I don't really understand it. It's very difficult to get it. And so that creates a bit of a barrier. So if there can be any policy focus on licensure of clinicians, that would be great. So those are the types of issues. But I really do think for behavioral health services, most especially, telehealth is going to be the strongest add-on to services that we can do. And it allows us, for example, to bring services into the schools, even when the schools are closed, to outside people. And so we just link up with a video unit and kids are talking back and forth, and it works really well. And so those, we see more of that. In fact, we do some telehealth services in Arcadia, and that's about 60 miles from Cashton, right? So it makes services very nice and easy and affordable. And so that's what we try and do. The other thing I wanted to note, though, just from a school perspective, is we had talked about putting in, as we put in these units into the area school districts, we pay for it, whatever internet access it is. Most schools, it's about $800–900 to do that. We just installed equipment in a different area school. It was $3,400. So we were used to about $900, and then we get the bill and it's $3,400 because of the difference of access and affordability. And so huge issue. And I think it's a budgetary thing for schools, just like it is for anybody else who's looking to build in. So that's that.
Absolutely. Mike, you touched on this a bit, but I'd like to get more from you. My observation is that in many cases, young people who grow up in a rural area like Trempealeau County wouldn't mind staying there if there's opportunity. So you've worked with local businesses to train your students in many respects. So tell us about retention. How are the programs you've put together helping keep young people residing when they go into their professional career in rural Trempealeau County?
Well, the truth is, I wish I knew. Honestly, we're about 5 years into our true work, and really about 2 years into the meat of it. I think the focus that we've started to pull together is to surround our kids with that message that you can stay here. It's okay. And with that is a change of perspective. Our kids primarily know what their mom and dad do, what their aunts and uncles do, maybe what their brothers and sisters do. That's too often, and it's weird that you can say that in 2021. But that's a lot of what we see. As we started to share career opportunities for kids and what they could really do and what they could really see, and living in rural America, it's changed. Just putting some notes down, a couple of our districts had 40+% of our seniors last year leave with industry credentials. So 40% of our graduating classes had some type of a credential when they left. We saw a huge increase in youth apprentices. So there's maybe your first indication of what retention might be able to do. Certainly there are some issues with insurance and with, depending on what type of employment opportunities are out there for kids. Certainly we can't have them necessarily on manufacturing floors and things like that. But I think that retention piece is to start. But much like the gentleman in the back brought up, with education, we tend to get grouped together as well. Rural education gets rolled into urban and suburban education. My blood actually boils when I hear how much we don't have shop classes anymore. We don't have CTE classes anymore. And I look and say, what do you mean? We've had them for every year that I've been in this gig. And now we've expanded upon those and do a tremendous amount. I mentioned the automation piece, but we're also doing aquaponics. We're doing welding. We're doing CNA things. We're doing grow your next generation of teachers and childcare workers. All of that stuff is being shown to kids as opportunities to live and work in rural areas. May not be our rural area, but the broadband piece, as was mentioned, we were fortunate. We've had distance learning networks. I believe our area of the state was the first in the country to have a distance learning network. It was a coax network back then. So we've had that connectivity forever. Certainly the pandemic showed us we had some pockets that weren't reachable for all of the reasons that you folks have mentioned, to the tune of about $4,000 a month in hotspots that we pay for right now, with some help, of course. But I think, that retention piece we're just starting to see, but we are seeing some of the move back as well. Our houses fill as soon as they're open. Houses are for sale, they sell. So certainly even the USDA approach of getting some housing help might not be a bad thing, but we're limited more by that than we are folks wanting to be in our rural areas.
You mentioned a couple of things, the apprentice notion. If the students are comfortable with the employers and the employers with students, chances are that's going to boost retention. The other thing is, you played off something that Nathan said earlier. It may not be their hometown, but it's a hometown, and that's okay. It really is. Okay, I have one more question for Angie, and then I think we can open up for questions from the rest of you. Angie, just a simple question, maybe not so simple. How wired is rural Minnesota? And considering your previous role in Wisconsin, how does that compare to the Badger State?
Well, that's a tricky question on the second part, but on the first part, I'll give you some data. So in Minnesota, we track our progress on wireline connectivity, so a wired connection. So statewide, we estimate that 93% of our households have access to a 25/3 service. That's our state's 2022 speed goal. And in rural Minnesota, that we're only at 85%. And then our state also has a 2026 speed goal of 100/20 service. And at those speeds, we're at 89% statewide and 75% rural. So we've definitely made progress there, and definitely some room to grow. And certainly one of the things we learned out of the pandemic was the need to take a look at that upload speed that's in our state speed goals, that 3 megabit per second upload speed. We heard anecdotally from quite a few folks during the pandemic that that's not necessarily enough when you've got a family trying to work and learn and do telehealth from home. It's just not adequate. So we are looking toward those 2026 speed goals. And I think we're seeing a tip at the hat of that at the federal level too, with the significant amount of federal funding that's coming our way. I'm not going to speak to where things are in the state of Wisconsin right now, other than to say, wow, folks here have done a tremendous job of building this program. There has been historic investment in the state of Wisconsin over the last few years, all building on the prior work of folks in this room too. So I think Wisconsin is definitely on a good trajectory to get everyone served. And I'm biased, but I'm a fan of the approach that folks are taking here and getting everyone connected. And, you know, you're talking about the cost for hotspots to connect students, right? And what I kept reminding folks during the pandemic, because that's we were doing in Minnesota too, working with our Department of Education. How do we get these students connected at home? But those students don't live at home alone. So there's a parent or guardian there who also doesn't have access to the internet that family needs. So it's really when we connect our students at home, we're connecting the family at home. I know you all know that, but it serves the entire family. And I'll close with this little piece. You know, there is significant amount of federal funding coming for the state of Minnesota out of the rescue plan funds. It's going to be $180 million for broadband infrastructure. So my advice to folks here is if you're not talking to your broadband providers or your educators or your healthcare providers about the need for broadband infrastructure in your communities, have those conversations. Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa have state broadband offices. If you need to find out how to get a hold of those folks, connect with me. I'll happily connect you with those folks in your state.
That was both informative and diplomatic, so thank you. That was true. Jenny has the magic microphone. We would certainly welcome questions. Jim Wood.
Okay, I didn't do it when Jeff was asking. I'm Jim Wood. I'm chairman of Wood Communications Group, and I serve as strategic counsel of Competitive Wisconsin, which is a collaboration of public, private sector folks, the academic community, focused mostly on systemic and structural issues affecting Wisconsin's economic well-being. Long lot of slug lines, my apologies. Again, wonderful panel, great comments. I think I actually am going to make a request as opposed to asking a question. Mary used the word crisis with relation to the workforce, and it's important that people hear that word crisis. The reality in this state is, not just in healthcare, but across the board, every day we are not winning on the workforce issue, we are losing. And you cannot get where you need to go in this state without recruiting people from outside the state. I'm in favor of all the good work that's being done. It's not enough. You have to begin to bring people into the state. So the systemic progress all of you have made in your areas is a critical piece of the go forward. But you really highlighted another critical piece, and that is it won't happen overnight. We are 2 years, 3 years, you know, it is like you have reached the river and you can see it across the river, but the bridge isn't there. It is absolutely critical, in my opinion, that folks like yourself not only come and tell us how important your product is and how wonderful it is and the difference it's making and can make, but you tell us, given where you stand, what is it we need over the next 2 years? How do we get that bridge built? What does that bridge look like? So don't just tell me what you need, tell me what you need for me not to do. Tell people how not to screw things up. Tell people how to put the pieces together. Rusty knows my bias is the private sector has got to get considerably more engaged at this moment in time with all the things you folks and others are talking about. And I would include Rusty as a national treasure in that request that you talk about, what do you do to make your community stronger? So you can turn that into a question if you want, Rusty, but that's the request.
I would like to respond to
Please
that.
do, Brian.
I appreciate the comment. I'm a big proponent of when the federal money is being allocated, that it comes back to the state. I think your local commissioners, your local legislators, your local offices, they truly know where the areas are not being served, and know who the providers are to make sure that that does get fulfilled. I'm a huge proponent of get down to make the local decisions and work with your state offices to allocate that. The other thing that I think I picked up here is we need to do more on partnerships with our school systems. Fiber splicers, that kind of technology, that's the stuff that we need to be training our workforce so we can hire technicians. And right now, we can't hire enough of them for what we've got going on. So I appreciate the insight and being part of this panel, because I also am getting some good takeaways on maybe more that what we can do. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yes. As Jen's coming up here, Mike, I have to tell you, I used to be on the board of the Washburn Academy. And it was once every session, we would put businesses and educators together. And it was like watching the freshmen at the senior prom. They all kind of see them dancing out there, but they're not really sure how to get there. And the fact that you just did it is just impressive as hell to me. You're really to be commended. And I think Brian says the same thing that all of us are thinking, that we need to do more of that. Yes.
I'm Brenda Hackman, and I'm an economic development developer with Almaquee Clayton Electric Cooperative. And I won't stand up so I don't have my back to everybody. But I'm a boomerang that came back to Iowa after 25 years. And one of the things, all of this that you're saying about retention, one of the things that I noticed after coming back and having actually as a parent that had children that were in college in other states that wanted to come back and live closer to mom and dad in Iowa is I also worked for Iowa Workforce Development, did a lot with apprenticeships. Apprenticeships were great. We got into the schools and talked about it. But then there's this group of college kids that wants to come back to certain areas. And what happens is they're in college, and what do? They do internships in bigger towns, not in the rural areas. So when they do these internships in these bigger towns, where do they go after college? They go to those bigger towns. So in the rural areas, what I saw as a workforce developer was, you talk to these businesses and say, hey, I've got a student that would love to do an internship with you. And they said, we don't know what to do with them. It's a lot of work. We've never done a program like that before. So I guess my question is that a conversation that there's some type of a curriculum? And I know there's so many different types of businesses, but something that could be set up to work with these rural businesses that would help bring some of these college students back up in the rural area so that they can be hired afterwards. And we bring those people in from other states also, and also just keep the students that are local.
That's an excellent question. Any answers?
I'll take a crack at it. Just an example of what we did. The four of us, again, power of more than one of us, right? We're 800 kids, but together we're 4,000 kids. We hired someone to run our youth apprenticeship program, become its own expert, then go out and help businesses, companies try to figure out that process and assist that, because from the inside out, we kind of know that gig. So again, your economy of scale allowed us to do that. But if we were, prior to 6 years ago, my job was to take kids from Independence and take kids from Arcadia and take kids from Blair Taylor, instead of working together to try to figure out how do we get better for all of our kids. So that's what we did. We hired someone because we could with the four of us. I couldn't afford to do that as the superintendent at Whitehall. None of the other three guys could either. But together we did. So we did. We hired an expert. We're on our second one of those now. So we had a little bit of a backup, but now we're going again. So
I think you heard Patty this morning say she loved the Twin Cities in her 20s and not so much in her 30s. And I will tell you, as former chair of the Seven Rivers Alliance, we see that a lot. And Jen, UWL, I know, has worked from an alumni standpoint, knowing that in their 20s, they're going to want to go to big places, and that's okay. But often in their 30s, they say, the commute stinks, the cost of childcare. I want something that's livable and enjoyable, and I know my neighbor and feel good about it. So in my mind, part of it is persistence. Okay, they're going to go away in their 20s, but we can still get them back. So having constant touches, the Alumni Association at UWL used to be really good at doing that and may still be. I think just remembering you've not lost them. They've just gone off for a while. But I think there's still the opportunity to get young people back at a certain stage in their life. And I think that's really important because, at that point, they really want to be there. And I think that speaks highly of the chances of that retention. Any other suggestions? Any other questions? Well, I must say, Brian, Angie, Mary, Mike, you have given us great examples of success stories, lots of terrific information, but honestly, great passion for the people you serve and the work that you do. And I find it so uplifting and so impressive. Please, let's thank them for their good work.
Thank you, Rusty, and this afternoon panelists. This was a fantastic dialogue. It almost feels normal, like pre-2020, of us gathering for an afternoon to learn some ideas, look at the industry network, and come away with maybe some new inspiration and new ideas. So certainly want to thank all of you who joined us both in person here in La Crosse at the Lunda Center. Want to thank those who joined us via the technology and the wizardry behind the curtain. Want to say thank you to the support staff of WIS Politics. Want to say thank you to Jeff Mayers for approaching Dairyland back in February or March to talk with both myself and Jenny Cooter-Radcliffe from Economic Development to pitch this idea of cooperatives being located in rural communities and having our fingers on the pulse and partnering with them about some of these best practices coming out after the pandemic, and look at solutions and what's happening with the partnerships and getting some inspiration and where we're going. So want to thank all of you. This concludes today's Rural Prosperity Summit, and safe travels to all of you. So thank you very much.